What if I told you that the Vice President of the United States, a man who converted to Catholicism, who is literally writing a memoir about his faith, who has talked publicly about how the Catholic Church transformed his life, just went on national television and told the Pope to shut up? Not in those exact words, but close enough. And here's the part that broke the internet. The same week that J.D. Vance told the head of the Catholic Church to stay out of politics, Vance himself had just flown overseas to campaign for a foreign leader in another country's election. Let that land for a second. The Catholic Vice President of the United States told the Pope, a man born in Chicago, Illinois, the first American Pope in history, to mind his business and stay out of U.S. politics, while he was literally just overseas doing politics, in another country. This is not satire. This is not a joke. This happened this week, right now. And if nobody in your life is explaining this to you, if your timeline is flooded with spin and noise and nobody is just laying out the raw truth, that is exactly why this channel exists. Hit subscribe right now. Turn on notifications, because we are the people who break it down without the filter, without the agenda, without the corporate talking points. You're not just hitting a button. You're joining a community of people who refuse to be talked down to, people who want the real story. Hit it. We'll be here every time something like this happens. And trust me, with this administration, that's basically every 72 hours. Brief pause, slight smile. Back to business. All right, let's get into it. Because this story has layers, and every single layer is wilder than the last. To understand why this moment matters, we need to back up just a few days. Because this didn't start with J.D. Vance on Fox News. This started with a war. Right now in 2026, the United States is involved in a military conflict with Iran. President Trump authorized military action, and the situation has escalated rapidly. The Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical waterways in the entire world, responsible for roughly 20% of global oil flow, has become a flashpoint. Iran essentially closed it to choke global oil markets, and the Trump administration responded by sending naval assets to block Iranian ships from leaving. This is a big deal. This is a really, really big deal. And into this charged moment, with bombs dropping, with oil markets rattled, with the entire world watching, the new Pope spoke up, Pope Leo XIV. And here's something you need to know about this man, because it's crucial context for everything we're about to discuss. Pope Leo XIV is the first American Pope in the history of the Catholic Church. His name before he became Pope? He was born in Chicago, Illinois. He is American. He grew up in the United States. He breathed the same air, watched the same news, and lived under the same government that J.D. Vance now serves. And when this American Pope looked at what the Trump administration was doing, the military strikes, the threats, the escalation, he spoke out. He called the war truly unacceptable. He warned against using religious or nationalistic messaging to justify violence. He said he would continue to speak loudly for peace. And that's when everything exploded. Let's talk about what Donald Trump actually said, because you need to hear this. The President of the United States went on Truth Social, his personal social media platform, and attacked the Pope. Not gently, not diplomatically. He attacked him. He called Pope Leo XIII, and I'm going to read this carefully so I get it right. He called him, quote, weak on crime and terrible for foreign policy. The President of the United States called the Pope weak on crime. He accused the Pope of thinking it's okay for Iran to have a nuclear weapon. He said the Catholic Church chose an American Pope because they thought it was the best way to deal with President Donald J. Trump. And he concluded by telling the Pope, the spiritual leader of over 1 billion Catholics worldwide, to get his act together. Now pause. Take a breath, because even many people who support Donald Trump were not ready for this one. David Brody, a prominent conservative commentator, a Trump supporter connected to the Christian Broadcasting Network, publicly posted, "Take this down, Mr. President. You're not God. None of us are. This goes too far. It crosses the line." Archbishop Paul Coakley, the head of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, pushed back. Bishop Robert Barron, who had literally been a guest at the White House just days earlier for Easter, called Trump's remarks entirely inappropriate and disrespectful and urged him to apologize. Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, who is politically aligned with Trump and has been one of his most reliable international allies, released a statement saying, "I find President Trump's words toward the Holy Father unacceptable. When your closest allies are breaking ranks to defend the Pope against you, that is a political earthquake. But wait, it gets better or worse, depending on how you look at it. That same weekend, the president posted an AI-generated image on Truth Social. The image depicted Donald Trump as Jesus Christ. I'm not making this up. An AI-generated image shared by the President of the United States showing him as a Christ-like figure with a soldier, a nurse, a praying woman, and other figures looking on. The backlash was immediate and it was bipartisan. Even diehard Trump supporters said this crossed a line. The image was eventually deleted. And when pressed about it, the president's explanation was extraordinary. He said, again, I'm not making this up, "It's supposed to be me as a doctor, making people better. And I do make people better. I make people a lot better." How did they come up with that? He asked, referring to people who thought the image looked like Jesus. So let's take a quick inventory of where we are at this point in the story. The president has called the Pope weak on crime. He posted an AI image of himself as Jesus. His conservative allies, his Catholic allies, his international partners are all in various states of shock. And now it falls to the Vice President of the United States, the Catholic Vice President, to go on national television and explain all of this. On Monday evening, J.D. Vance sat down with Fox News anchor Brett Baier for an interview on Special Report. Now, J.D. Vance is not just any Catholic. He converted to Catholicism in 2019. He has spoken openly and passionately about how his faith shapes his identity and his politics. He is literally writing a memoir this summer titled Communion: Finding My Way Back to Faith, a book about his conversion to Catholicism. This is a man who has staked a significant part of his public identity on being a serious, committed Catholic. And Brett Baier asked him directly, "What do you make of this war between your boss and your Pope?" Here's what Vance said. He said the president has the right to set American foreign policy and immigration policy. He said it's totally reasonable to have disagreements with the Vatican from time to time. He said the conflict is not particularly newsworthy. And then he said this: "I certainly think that in some cases it would be best for the Vatican to stick to matters of morality, to stick to matters of what's going on in the Catholic Church, and let the President of the United States stick to dictating American public policy, stick to matters of morality." Now let's think about that for a moment, because this is where the critics, and honestly even some supporters, started raising their eyebrows. The Pope wasn't commenting on the Senate filibuster. He wasn't weighing in on tax brackets or zoning laws or agricultural subsidies. The Pope spoke out about a war, about the deaths of human beings, about immigrants seeking safety, about the threat of nuclear weapons being used. Critics immediately pointed out those are matters of morality. That is, by any reasonable definition, exactly what the moral leader of a billion people is supposed to speak about. MSNBC's Steve Bannon put it bluntly, writing that for Vance to argue that wars and the plight of immigrants were out of bounds was simply embarrassing. He described it as the latest in a series of humiliations for the beleaguered vice president. On social media, calls for Vance to resign flooded in from Catholic voices across the political spectrum. If J.D. Vance were a real Catholic, he would resign immediately and denounce Trump over this, one prominent account wrote. If Vance is indeed a Catholic, he would have to resign today, wrote another. Now, I'm not here to tell you whether he should resign or not. That's not what NationPulse does. We lay out the facts and let you decide. But I am going to give you the fact that the mainstream coverage largely buried. The fact that turns this from a political controversy into something almost poetic in its irony. Here's what they're not emphasizing enough. The same week that J.D. Vance went on Fox News and told the Pope, an American-born man from Chicago, to stay out of U.S. politics, J.D. Vance had literally just flown to Hungary, not for a diplomatic summit, not for a state visit, not for NATO business. He flew to Hungary to campaign for Viktor Orban. Orban was the prime minister of Hungary. He's been in power for 16 years. He is considered one of the most authoritarian leaders in Europe. He is also one of the Trump administration's closest international allies. And J.D. Vance showed up in Budapest to deliver a speech praising Orban right before a critical Hungarian election. Let that sink in. The vice president of the United States traveled to a foreign country to actively support a political leader in that country's election. He took an active role in the domestic politics of a sovereign foreign nation, and then flew back home, and then went on Fox News and told the Pope to stay out of politics. Social media caught this immediately. The responses were swift. One ex-user wrote, "The guy who just flew to Hungary to get involved in their politics tells the Pope, who is from Chicago, Illinois, to stay out of U.S. politics." Another, J.D. Vance meddles in Hungary, tells Pope from Chicago to stay out of U.S. politics. Someone else noted, and this is my personal favorite, imagine telling a guy from the Windy City to stay out of U.S. politics while you're literally overseas picking up tips on how to run a country. Here is the other detail that got lost in the shuffle. Vance's trip to Hungary, it didn't even work. Despite the vice president of the United States showing up to boost him, Viktor Orban lost the election. The opposition TISA party, led by Peter Magyar, won, ending Orban's 16-year grip on power. So not only did Vance meddle in a foreign election, he lost. Now let's zoom out, because I think this story is about something bigger than one Fox News interview or one social media post. What we are watching is a collision between two kinds of authority. On one side, you have political authority, the power of the state, the power of elections, executive orders, military force, and government policy, the kind of power that controls borders, launches wars, and shapes economies. On the other side, you have moral authority, the power of conscience, the power of institutions that have existed for centuries that speak to something deeper than tax rates or approval ratings. The kind of authority that doesn't derive from votes, but from something people experience as sacred. For most of American history, these two authorities have maintained a careful, sometimes uncomfortable, but functional separation. The First Amendment enshrines the separation of church and state. Religious leaders have historically been free to speak on moral and social issues, and political leaders have typically responded with at least a performative degree of respect, even when they disagreed. What's unusual about this moment is not that a president disagrees with a pope. That has happened before. Ronald Reagan and John Paul II had disagreements. Presidents and religious leaders have always navigated tension. What's unusual is the tone, the open contempt, the public attack, the name-calling on a social media platform, and what's equally unusual is the reversal of roles. The administration that loudly champions Christian values, that has positioned itself as the defender of religious tradition, of faith in public life, of God in the public square, is the same administration that is publicly attacking the leader of one of the world's oldest and most influential Christian institutions. The administration that constantly warns about anti-Christian bias is telling the Pope to be quiet. You don't have to be Catholic to find that striking. You just have to be paying attention. And here's what I think is one of the most underreported parts of this story. The Pope's response: when all of this went down, when Trump called him weak, when the AI Jesus photo went up, when Vance went on Fox News, Pope Leo XIV was literally on an airplane heading to Africa on an 11-day apostolic journey. He was asked about the attacks. He said he had no fear of the Trump administration. He didn't fire back. He didn't go on social media. He didn't call anyone names or accuse anyone of being weak on crime. He said he had no fear, and he kept going. He landed in Algeria, and he gave a sermon, and he called for peace. That's it. Now, you can agree or disagree with the Pope's positions on immigration and war. That is absolutely your right. People of good faith disagree about these issues all the time. But there is something worth noticing about the contrast in style. One side is posting AI images on social media and calling people names. The other side is saying no fear and boarding a plane to Africa. The optics of this moment are going to reverberate for a while. Let's talk about the political math here, because there is a very real electoral dimension to this story that neither side wants to talk about too loudly. Catholics make up approximately 20 to 22% of the American population. That is not a fringe constituency. That is a major voting bloc. In 2024, a majority of Catholic voters supported Donald Trump. That was a significant part of his winning coalition. And for years, Republicans have worked hard to attract Catholic voters, particularly on issues like abortion, religious liberty, and traditional values. J.D. Vance converting to Catholicism was, in that context, a politically significant moment. Having a Catholic vice president, the first Catholic Republican vice president in American history, was not an accident. It was partly a signal to Catholic voters. And now that same Catholic vice president is on national television telling the Pope to mind his business. How does that land with Catholic voters? That's a genuinely interesting question. A February AP NORC poll found that while roughly 2/3 of white born-again Protestants approved of Trump's job performance, Catholics were significantly unhappier. That split was already visible before this week, and now some of the most prominent Catholic voices in the country, including conservative bishops who were at the White House for Easter just days ago, are pushing back on Trump's attacks on the Pope. Archbishop Coakley, Bishop Barron, these are not liberal Catholics. These are not political opponents of Donald Trump. These are traditional conservative Catholic leaders, and they are publicly criticizing the president. When you lose Bishop Barron, who was at your Easter celebration less than a week ago, you have stepped on a serious landmine. Whether this moves votes in 2026 or beyond, I genuinely do not know, but the cracks are visible. And political cracks, once they appear, have a way of widening. I want to make one more observation before we wrap up, because I think it matters. The phrase, stick to your lane, or in this case, stick to matters of morality, is not new in American politics. It's a rhetorical strategy, and it has a very specific function. It is used to delegitimize dissent from institutions that don't derive their power from the state. When teachers speak out about education policy, stay in your lane. When doctors speak out about healthcare legislation, stay in your lane. When scientists speak out about climate policy, stay in your lane. When athletes take a knee, stick to sports. When artists speak at award shows, stick to your craft. The message is always the same. Your expertise and your moral standing only count inside a narrow box that we define for you. The moment you step outside that box, you become illegitimate. And now that logic is being applied to the Pope, a man whose entire identity is rooted in moral leadership, whose job, as defined by the institution he leads, is to speak to questions of justice, war, human dignity, and peace, is being told that those topics are out of bounds. That is a remarkable claim. And it deserves to be recognized for what it is. Not a principled argument about the separation of church and state, but a political maneuver designed to silence a critic. You can believe in the separation of church and state, I do, and still recognize that telling a moral leader not to talk about morality is not the same thing. The Pope is not running for office. He is not trying to pass legislation. He is saying, this war is wrong. These policies harm human beings. We should pursue peace. Whether you agree with him or not, that is precisely what moral leaders are supposed to do. So let's bring this all the way back around. This week, the Trump administration got into a full-blown public confrontation with the head of the Catholic Church. The president called the Pope weak. He posted an AI image of himself as Jesus. His Catholic vice president went on national television and told the Pope to stay out of politics. That same vice president had just returned from trying to help a foreign leader win re-election in Hungary, and failing. The Pope responded by getting on a plane to Africa and saying he has no fear. Conservative Catholic leaders who were at the White House for Easter are now publicly criticizing the president. Italy's prime minister, one of Trump's closest allies, said the attacks on the Pope were unacceptable. And underneath all of it, there is a deeper story about what happens when political power and moral authority collide. And one side decides to stop pretending there are rules. This is the United States in April 2026. This is the world we are navigating together. And here is the question I want to leave you with. Not because I have the answer, but because I think it's the question worth sitting with. When the most powerful political office in the world starts telling moral institutions when they're allowed to speak and what they're allowed to say, who's next? That's the story. That's the full picture. Not the spin, not the clip out of context, not the 3-second soundbite designed to make you angrier without making you smarter. That's NationPulse. That's what we do here. Now here's what I need from you. First, if this video gave you something real, hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second and it tells the algorithm that this kind of journalism matters, that people want depth, that people want truth over noise. Second, subscribe if you haven't already. We are building something here. A community of people who take politics seriously, who refuse to be fed a narrative without examining it, and who believe that an informed citizen is the most dangerous thing to any administration of any party. Be dangerous. Subscribe. Third, leave me a comment below. I want to know, where do you stand on this? Should the Pope be speaking out on war and immigration policy? Or is Vance right? Does the Vatican need to focus on its lane? Tell me your actual opinion. No judgment. We debate here. We don't cancel here. And finally, share this video. Text it to someone. Post it on your story. Because the number one way they control the narrative is by keeping people isolated. When you share this, you break that isolation. You say, I found something real and I think you should see it too. I'm grateful you spent this time with me. This is NationPulse. This is NeHub 24. Stay informed, stay awake, and I'll see you in the next one.